Okay, first things first. Jimmy Carter is 99. Taylor Swift apparently has the power to resurrect AMC theaters. Russia intercepted, I got to read this, 5 HIMARS, a JDAM bomb, 37 drones over Ukraine in the last 24 hours, but Kyiv launched like 50 drones.
Well, that was random.
And there's more. So Russia says, they could target any British soldiers training troops in Ukraine. And as a result, UK PM says that there are no plans now to send British troops to train Ukrainian soldiers. There's some shipwrecks, like iconic Great Lake shipwrecks, in the Great Lakes. And they're being destroyed by invasive mussels because people can't keep these things off of their boats. And then they go through the Great Lakes system to deliver stuff to Chicago, I guess. And here's the one that gets me. This is news. This is groundbreaking science. 2 Chinese astronauts on board their Tiangong space station, they lit a candle with a match during a live broadcast.
Whoa.
Yeah. And this is actually a big deal. Like that, it's really quite incredible because fire doesn't really operate the same in a decaying orbit, or not a geocentric orbit. It doesn't behave the same without gravity. It just it doesn't behave the way we expect it to. It forms like an orb, and then it spreads on its own. But they lit a candle. It's really interesting to, because of the way it works. Also, it's pretty dangerous, igniting any kind of source in a tightly contained capsule, airtight capsule, with highly compressed air containers just right next to you, or oxygen containers. Basically just fuel.
That seems so questionable, right?
It seems like a terrible idea, but they actually did it. So but science and stuff. The Chinese developed a candle that burns in space.
I mean, I guess I wonder what's the benefit. You know what I mean? Like,
I can't tell if there's any real benefit.
It's like, okay, cool, but now what? What are you gonna do with that?
They're gonna make
start using candles instead of lights.
I don't know. They're gonna start
on the
they're gonna start
space station.
They're just gonna start coating the inside of their multi-million-dollar facility in space with soot. Is what's gonna happen. I bet it's gonna throw their oxygen scrubbers into like overdrive. Their oxygen system's gonna be like, guys, there's a real serious problem. All of the sensors say that our crew's about to die. Just coated with candle soot.
Well, I wonder if it burns in space or on the space station, if it doesn't release soot into the air or something. Possibly, I don't know.
Well, I think because of the way that way that it burns in the microgravity environment, that would be the experiment to determine how smoke particles travel where soot goes.
Right. Yeah, because it probably wouldn't stick to like the ceiling necessarily. Like it wouldn't necessarily stick to anything, and
it would probably be attracted to I don't know, anything that generates static electricity would draw it.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a uniquely dirty way of finding out where the static is being generated. I'm sorry, I'm just really entertained by the idea.
I feel like dust would be more practical if that's what they're less likely to cause an explosion.
I mean, I'm pretty anti-glitter, but I even think glitter would be a better, I don't know, substance to test where things collect. Then you could find it really easily. You just get a flashlight out. But yeah, dust would be good too. They produce dust naturally, hair and skin. Maybe the dust doesn't work as well.
I would hope there's a practical use for that in terms of like, well, maybe they'll be able to create oxygen or some shit using flames. Um,
Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on like what the candle's made of. If it's, yeah, I don't know, man. It just seems like such a unnecessarily obtuse engineering risk that
So,
it's hard to fathom.
and it looks like the Chinese are testing survival and proliferation of methanogens in different environments. They're conducting radiation experiments on plant seeds, microorganisms, and small animals. They're sending zebrafish into orbit to research the interaction between fish and microorganisms in a small closed ecosystem. So they're trying to make like a aquaponics system in space. It looks like maybe they do need a source for to produce carbon dioxide. I don't see how burning things is going to do that, though.
I guess it was a demonstration to show how flames burn in microgravity,
Yeah, but we already knew how that worked.
right?
In 2023, Chinese scientists conducted a decades-old experiment to demonstrate their ability to, I don't know, take a candle into space. Who smuggled the candle into space? That candle cost like $10,000 to get up there. Actually, about it was like more like $16,000 now. China's economy is fucked up. All the floods on their eastern seaboard, all the flooding on our eastern seaboard. So, like the past week when we had extensive flooding in New York City, did you see the video of the whirlpool?
Yeah, that shit was crazy.
That was nuts. All the train systems were shut down because the tunnels are flooded. People having to take like hour-long taxi rides because can't get anywhere without the train. Um,
I saw some idiot like on Twitter saying, I haven't seen one video of rain to show where this flooding would come from. And I'm like, man,
what?
Americans really are the weakest links.
Oh man! So New York is like a hundreds years old megalopolis, and at one point it was a crowning achievement, and like the city on the hill, the city of the future that Arthur Clarke described, and man, it's flooding. And apparently, the governor of New York State's like, yeah, because of climate change, expect more of this. This is like going to become the standard now because New York City is really old and does not have adequate infrastructure to handle this kind of deluge, which is really what we should be describing it as. Um, and
He also said if people have time to go on Twitter and complain about it, it can't be that bad.
yeah, well,
This guy's a fucking
oh
moron.
my god, like,
Fucking Eric Adams is a goddamn moron. And it's like it's comical because we're not there, but I can only imagine being a New Yorker how pissed I'd be if that was my uh elected official's response to some shit like that.
oh man, what a, what a, I mean, it's not flooding up in the penthouse levels. That'd be really fucked up.
Right. Well, but those, whatever has a penthouse has a foundation that's being flooded. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
nobody's safe.
And if there's more to come, because infrastructure lacking a huge deficit in infrastructure, it cannot move this much water. The water's like, hell no, we're gonna take the subway. God. There are like dozens of mega projects all over the globe. Well, not in the United. There's like one in the United States that I'm aware of. But these are all, you know, cities of the future that are uh, incorporating the latest in design theory into how to incorporate the actual, you know, environment into the development of these cities, and they're being designed around ease of access. In some cases, they're like vehicle-less transport, or they have like trains or electric trams, but they're not built around cars because resources are distributed. And it seems that like the big roadblock is in America is regulation, all the regulations. In some places, you know, you can't build a new city would never be able to incorporate because the county would have to vote on whether or not they want to allow it. And even if somebody owns, even if an entity owns an entire area of land, you know, they've got to get permission, which, and that makes sense on some level, except this is supposed to be America where people can just do whatever the fuck they want, right? But apparently not. And even if these developers want to use the most ecologically friendly practices and spend their own money, you know, spend their own billions upon billions of dollars to do this, it just doesn't happen. But in other countries, you know, they're getting buildings of the future that look like they come out of science fiction because they are using new technology to build like laminate glass that has incredible curvatures and but still, you know, is energy efficient and or highly efficient, and, you know, lets the light through but doesn't let the heat in, or all of these things that, you know, I read about technology. It's like, man, why doesn't this stuff exist around here? Why am I reading about something in Malaysia or Indonesia or Egypt? I think Egypt is moving their capital. They're moving their entire capital. Holy crap. Like, that's like unthinkable in the United States.
It's pretty wild. Yeah, it'd be like imagine
Imagine Indianapolis
switching.
being like, hey guys, uh,
I mean, I guess it happened here. What, a little over 100 years ago? Nah, maybe it was a little longer than that. Was it was it Concord?
apparently the first capital city of
Oh,
the United.
Corydon.
Yeah,
Corydon was the first capital of Indiana.
yeah. Apparently, the first capital of the United States was New York City from 1785 to 1790. Wow. And then it was moved to Philadelphia from 1790 to 1800. So they've moved it around, it looks like. I don't think they built an entire city though. Like, I think DC is like they built an entire city for it. Oh man. Yeah, Washington D.C. Capitol Hill construction started in 1793. So the United States built an entire city for the capital. You know, man, was that 200 years ago? 230 years ago?
I mean,
So,
kind of.
so that's but
It's
that's an ancient city at this point. A 200-year-old city with 200-year-old design language and design theory behind it. They
that's
didn't
why it's a
they didn't
such
have
a poorly like designed city
yeah. That's
in
why there's
terms of
flooding in New
like.
York. They just like this is a city that
Where
the capital is like a city that would appeal to the Romans, but and tourists now.
Yeah, maybe sometimes shit needs to move.
Yeah, maybe. So
Just
when they moved to New Cairo at some point, like it's only supposed to be like 45 minutes to an hour outside of existing Cairo. Um, my understanding is that it's essentially to move the administrative functions of Cairo away from all of the business, all of the commerce and urban sprawl because it's a distraction. Well, that makes sense because Cairo is a gigantic city, like a huge city. When I look at it on the map, it's actually really impressive, especially since it's been around for like forever. But yeah, New Cairo, it's on the map already. And it's way outside of
well, I
Cairo
think
proper.
that is how a lot of places do their capitals, but America is just Walmart. We approach everything like Walmart. It's like,
Hey,
oh,
we
you
can't.
want government, you want commerce, you want industrialism.
Let's
You
give
can
you
have it
Costco.
all. Here's a port right next to your Capitol building.
And pop up IKEA flat pack. It like comes straight out of a flat pack container inside of a shipping box. It's like, but yeah, we don't get to have really cool mega structures because regulations. Because even if somebody wanted to build something really forward thinking, they have to get permission from the entire county of some place, or even if it's out in the middle of nowhere. That makes sense. They've got to share water, they've got to share electricity, they've got to do something about resources. But if these are like groups of billionaires who can bring together, hundreds of billions of dollars, then and they want to spend it on developing a city with infrastructure that's designed to handle, X amount of people, and they want to foot the bill, and then hopefully people will move there and they're willing to take that gamble. Isn't that like I guess that creates a housing bubble on some level. But not really, because they already they have the money. They don't need to take a loan to do it. I'm trying to think of if there's like a real problem if assuming like environmental surveys are here are observed, and the geological survey says yeah, everything is good to go, and everything is done right. I'm just trying to think of like realistic maybe somebody's holding on to land because they want to hold out for more money, and I get that too.
I mean, that definitely happens all the time, which is shit should be illegal, really.
Yeah.
It's really fucked up. That shit's happening in downtown Indianapolis, like all over the place. If you see an unused lot in in a neighborhood where it's like, why isn't anybody doing anything? It's like probably somebody's sitting on it waiting for it to go up in value and not selling.
Yeah, because they don't have enough money to develop it themselves, but the lot will be desirable someday, maybe. Hopefully.
But it's just enough to like cause disruption in the local street or whatever, and
Yeah.
that's where I see that shit in a lot of places in Indianapolis. So I'm sure, it's happening all over the country, but I mean, obviously the world to that extent, but I mean, on that note, I know there's places where you can't do that. So like, not to say that Japan does everything perfectly, but you can't just like buy property to sit on it to like sell it. So their shit loses, it depreciates instead of what's meant to appreciate in the real estate market here. Um, so you don't get a ton of people sitting on like 3 and 4 properties.
Yeah, the longer in densely populated areas, the longer a place sits vacant, the more it eventually costs to raise the land and build something new on it, because the existing, you know, the water or the electrical system of that property is decaying. All these things decay. The longer it rests, the longer it rots, basically. Japan's crazy.
Oh,
That place has like a growing population and ghost towns, like in the hills, where I read about people who, you know, buy a house for like pennies on the dollar.
yeah. I mean, I've seen that, but then those same people, not those same people, some of those people try to buy them and then flip them, but they can't do it because that culture doesn't.
Yeah, they don't do that. You got to
Yeah,
live
it
there if you
doesn't.
want to buy that house. Who wants to
So it's
live in,
like
in rural Japan where there's no internet and there's no air
that whole.
conditioning, there's no roads. You're gonna have to learn the language because nobody out there is gonna speak English.
There was like an attempt at those people trying to go over there and gentrify, but it didn't work. And it was like,
Good, fucking
yeah, oh
good.
yeah, oh yeah. But it's funny in terms of like, there was definitely a period where blogs and, you know, influencers were trying to push that as like the next big thing in real estate. And it failed miserably. So that's why I thought it was hilarious. And in terms of like, you'll see the rise of something in social media, but you never really see the fall side. Um, but that was one where I was definitely happy to see all the people who went over there to do that shit that it was not working out.
Yeah, man. Asia's got some tough hurdles in front of it. Like Japan's got to contend with the Fukushima disaster still because it's still a problem. It's going to be a problem like for the rest of our lives. And there, my dad shared this video with me about how in China the influencers have been deep faked and are being generated with AI to just influence 24/7 now. And I mean, I don't know what they're saying, but you can kind of see these moments where the AI influencer, the deepfake influencer, goes like full max headroom and like twitches a whole bunch, and then goes right back into their script. It's just like, to me, that's one of the darkest parts of cyberpunk fiction that's actually starting to manifest. I mean, clearly the next step is, Xi Jinping is the first Chinese emperor to discover the pill of immortality, and we're going to get a deep fake AI Xi Jinping at some point.
Well, and that's where I don't know
And
how
then he's
much
just controlled by the party.
influencing in terms of like, yeah, those things exist, but how many people actually are influenced by them?
That's a good
You know what
question.
I mean? Because that's where I'm like, you see stuff presented, but it's like that's not necessarily what the kids are going to be into or what their influencing scene actually looks like in terms of
Oh, for sure.
um
Well, apparently, young people in China are like tuning out from technology. Like the there's a demographic shift away from.
well, but do you remember when they tried to have a AI rapper here,
Oh yeah,
FN Mecca?
it wasn't bad, but it also
It was
wasn't real.
horrible. It was horrible in the sense of like the the things that it was saying, and it was like canned lines. Like, not only was it canned lines, they took a real person's voice and just chopped it up into a bunch of different things. So like the way it was being presented and like what was actually being done was like it wasn't a real person, but it also wasn't 100% like artificial intelligence the way they were trying to make it seem. And it was like, um,
Yeah, but they're deep faking real people.
oh,
And
of course. But this is also what I mean. Like when that shit happens, it gets met with resistance in a way where like nobody bought it. Like the thing was there and it was on TikTok, and it was only when they tried to like make a push and blow it up when people were aware of it that they were like, oh shit, nobody likes this thing. Nobody is actually fucking with it. They're like faking the TikTok numbers because they'd have like 100,000 views, but like 30 comments, or like a million views and like 40 comments. And so the things where you looked at the original account weren't adding up. Like none of it was real, but they were trying it and testing the waters in terms of like, um, gorillas is like, that shit was huge here. And it's obviously not artificial intelligence and it's not deep fake, but it's something almost more unreal in terms of like, for a while people thought there was an actual band, and then they started bringing in people to actually do a band because they're like, oh, the way it's written, there must be an actual band to go with these characters. And like
I think this
it
is
was
so it's like all e-commerce. They're selling shit. They're really selling shit. Costs less than $1,000 to generate a digital clone just to stream e-com advertising.
yeah, because that's when I'm like, the idea of deep faking, like if somebody did a deep fake of Jake Paul
Would
trying to
anybody
sell
actually notice?
something,
I'm just kidding.
would anybody actually care though?
Yeah.
Because that's where I'm like, the people who are Jake Paul's audience, if somebody deep faked him to try to like sell their product or whatever, his audience would probably think it was hilarious, but wouldn't be stupid enough to not know that it wasn't a deep fake, but still would support it anyway because it was. So there's all these elements of like,
Oh
you
wow.
can't assume because somebody's doing something that means that they're too stupid to not know what they're doing and also be aware and doing it ironically. um and that's where like, when hipsters started dressing up like people from 1920s because the hipster movement started getting mocked by being associated with the 1920s, and they just leaned into it. So there's this element of like,
I
do they
forgot
know
about
that
that.
we're laughing at them, and they don't care. So that's where it's like,
You
if
know,
there's an element of do these kids know it's a deep fake? They don't fucking care. It's like, does the thing that the deep fake is selling relate to them? Then it doesn't matter if it's a deep fake or not.
yeah.
Like if and I think that's ultimately like one of the things that, to me, capitalism capitalism doesn't care about ethics if it's actual capitalism. And I think that's where there's ethics are imposed through government legislation and then through market response, but capitalism doesn't have an onus to have ethics. So like, to me, this is perfectly like in line with the most exploitive route of, oh, we're doing social influencing now. Well, a social influencer can't make 1,000 hours worth of content in a week, but if we deep fake them, then that's how you can. And I think part of the problem in creating an audience that doesn't discern is that, yeah, if you create deep fake Jake Paul, They don't give a shit because, or okay, like the Jackass crew. If you have a bunch of people doing stunts and then you just deep fake Johnny Knoxville's face over it, the Jackass crowd won't give a shit and they'll watch that shit anyway because they're not that discerning. They're not in it for like
Yeah,
integrity of the
it looks like
thing.
most of these deepfake AI announce or clone influencers, they're all sitting in front of a desk in front of what might as well be a green screen. So it's not even like they're going to great lengths to create a complex production. It's like a person in a chair with a nondescript desk and really nondescript desk. Here's another one. It's a woman in a cubicle in front of her phone with a product. Yeah, they're not going to great lengths to create massive amounts of content. They just figured out a way to churn out commercials, basically. Well, that's no way less interesting, actually. But they did go to the length of rendering a oh, it's a knockoff of a Rode lapel microphone product. Well, they just figured out a way to cut thousands of people out of jobs.
Okay. So no, this is bullshit. So the if you look up the top virtual influencer, the top Chinese social influencer that's like a virtual one, it's Luo Tianyi. Well, then you go to her YouTube page. Barely almost just about to hit 4 million views. So nobody's actually fucking watching this shit. You're telling me in a country with over 1 billion people, the top virtual influencer can't get 4 million views? Nah, nobody's watching that shit. And how many of them are fake at that? At least half of them are probably fake. So like,
I don't think that they'd be
nah.
on. I don't think they would be on YouTube
I mean, why not?
because it's China. They've got Chinese YouTube.
I watch Chinese hip hop on YouTube all the time. I mean, like, not to say that that's going to be their main, like, they're going to be on other Chinese platforms, but if they, if they're the top influencers, they're still going to have a um, presence on YouTube just by proxy in
I
terms of
mean,
like,
maybe there's no audience for them on YouTube, and they've got a huge audience on what are the Chinese ones? Weibo and um, there's other ones other than TikTok. Oh, here we go. Weibo, Billy, oh, Billy, and Douyin. Those are Chinese versions of Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. So
so one of my favorite
Xiao
songs
Shangju and
by
Taobao.
Higher Brothers is a Chinese rap group. The one just one song on YouTube has 25 million views alone.
Yeah.
Just one song. And this is like not their biggest song, so that's where I'm like, I'm sure they have a bigger presence on probably way different Chinese social media because hell, one of their songs is called it's about WeChat. The only reason I even know about WeChat is because of fucking Higher Brothers and them rapping about it, which is where I mean, like, I know that, like, yeah, you're not gonna find them on Facebook, you're gonna find them on fucking WeChat because that's what they fucking rap about,
So
So
I just went to a Billy, and the first thing that pops up is some some kind of barbecued meat on a stick for and it's got 1.8 million views, and this was released early last week. I can't read any of this stuff, so I can't really tell. They just have like
you know what? I think they're trying to lie and make it seem like it's catching on over there to make it seem like it's okay when they try to do it here again because it failed here the first time. So then they're like, oh, they're doing it over there in China. They're probably doing it in Japan too. And then you find out like, they're doing it, but nobody's actually really like being influenced by it necessarily, or like they're not competing with real artists or real influencers
Oh no, it's a
in the way
completely
that,
different creative economy over there. It's I don't think
yeah,
I think
that's
it's
where.
like a it's like a the pH is so different that it's like that parts of the oceans where where they don't mix. It's like no, sorry,
For sure.
we've got our own
But
shit. They're
that's
like
not what the articles are saying. Like, if you
no,
read
no,
the
no.
articles, are making it seem like, oh, Chinese influencers are being replaced by virtual and AI, and it's like, that's not what's happening. But the framing is kind of sus in terms of like, why are people trying to make it seem like that's what's happening? And then when you just do a little bit of digging, it's not, definitely not what's going on. Because that's where I'm like,
Yeah, here's a person who is I don't even know what they're doing. It looks like they're tying their shoes, but they've got 1.2 million views in the last day and a half in China on Bilibili. Man, I need to hang out on Bilibili. There's some really weird looking content that I can't tell what it is. It's like some of it looks familiar because it's got like anime faces and there's food and video games, but I don't recognize any of these faces. Here's a cat, but everything around it's in Chinese. Some of these video games look familiar, like weird knockoffs of video games that I'm familiar with.
well, and that's another thing. Like, once I realized on Steam that if you turn off your English only filter, you get all these Chinese video games that, Chinese RPGs are slightly, I mean, not slightly, they're different than Japanese RPGs in their style, but the way that they're paced is also slightly different. So there's this element of like, oh, if you like Japanese RPGs, you might like Chinese RPGs, but you might not because it's not the same thing. But it's also like they're they don't translate into English a lot of times, so you kind of have to like feel your way through some of them. In terms of like navigating the menus, you're like, oh, this is probably start, this is probably continue,
Next thing you
and
know,
then
you've like
if you don't know Chinese, obviously, like if somebody knows Chinese, like or Cantonese, like that, obviously they're not gonna um have a problem navigating those things. But I guess as somebody who's trying to play a video game that's behind a language wall, that's where it like, because a lot of them aren't also expensive, so it'll be like it's not a huge uh
here's one. What
waste.
here's one. What does pickle Rick taste like? That never would. I've never would have come across that on YouTube.
Well, YouTube is definitely like watering itself down in an
Yeah.
attempt to retain the advertisers, which is hilarious. Because at one point it was like, are they gonna? I mean, they still allow nudity on there now, but it was like, are they gonna turn into like
Soft porn hub.
porn? Yeah, soft porn.
Soft porn
Um,
hub. Wait, somebody
where
should probably
Amazon's
start that.
like full on. Um, man, I I don't know who decided that there's not enough dicks in content, and they're gonna be like, oh, we're gonna lean into like showing dicks now, and that's gonna be the thing. But like the boys and Generation V and like that type of shock humor is like,
Oh, there was another
it's
Amazon
already
thing that I was
old.
trying
It's
to
already
watch where there
old.
was a bunch of dicks on the screen. I can't remember what it was.
It's so dead on arrival in terms of like, I think you can't go to that well when porn exists, when it's like, you're trying to show a penis to shock people, but the fact that nobody's really shocked by a penis anymore is just it's cringe when you're like, "Oh, I know what you're trying to do. This is the equivalent of trying to do a magic trick that everybody knows how it's being done, but they go through with it anyway and they follow through and then they wait for the applause line and it's like, okay, are you done yet? And it's like I guess with the boys, I know that they're gonna do that, so I'm just prepared to just like skip stuff. But it I'm really starting to learn. um I think that there should be no, I know capitalism would never do this, but you should have to take a test before you consume certain types of media. And the reason I'm saying this is because I've had an exchange where now I'm realizing that like if the satire is too good, there's going to be too many people that don't get it, that it's satire. And that's not inherently problematic, except that those people have to then go back into the real world and take in this thing that was meant to say one thing, them completely misunderstand it, and then apply that misunderstanding into their life. And I think that's
Isn't
where
like what happened to memes in general?
kind of I think the most obvious one is like Dark Brandon, how that one is like there's so many layers of misinterpretation of that specific meme that it's like out of control misunderstanding and misinterpretation, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, where I think that's like one of the best examples. um but I think one of the most misunderstood satirical works is probably Starship Troopers.
Oh
um
yeah.
just watching the subsequent films that were made, and it was like, no, at least a couple of them were still trying to do satire, and then they just gave up on the satire altogether. But it's because a lot of the American audience, the satire went over their heads. But
3 live action and 2 animation. I didn't know. I had no
I
idea.
thought there was more. I thought there was more than that.
There's
But
also an animated TV series called Roughnecks, and but yeah, 3 live action, 2 animated, and a TV series. Oh my goodness!
yeah,
Somebody actually called it a hidden gem. Might have to watch it now.
what?
Roughnecks, Starship Troopers series.
Mm.
I bet I've actually seen it, and it was so terrible that I didn't like commit to memory that I'd seen it. That's a good point, though. Starship Troopers, the book, is like a scathing rebuke of fascism. And the first movie, they were a little too over the top with the satire, I think. And instead of being cautionary, it became a hey, this is fun. Let's go do this stuff. We'll become citizens. And uh, the delivery was wrong. The story was still exactly what it was supposed to be.
Well, I mean, I think the delivery was wrong only in that the audience didn't get it and the audience is too stupid.
Oh
But if
yeah,
you go back and watch it, there's nothing else they could have done besides just flash "this is satire" in large letters at the bottom.
I
Like
mean that was kind of obvious.
fucking
I thought that
Neil
was
Patrick
obvious with
Harris.
the whenever they did the commercials, and they're like, "Join the Space Marines, join the Space Navy, join the blah 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 blah, fight the bugs." All that kind of energy. I thought that was obvious.
I mean, those were the points where it was obvious, but the points where other people were supposed to think it was obvious when it was like Neil Patrick Harris, like stitching people up or whatever, in terms of, you got kids taking care of other kids coming back from war and fighting these fucking bugs. And it's like, that shit's supposed to be satirical, but if they don't put it too over the top, then the audience doesn't get that part.
Yeah.
Or how when they're talking them, giving them the speeches and how they're supposed to be like completely devoting themselves to the cause or whatever, whatever the fuck the thing is, it's very satiric in nature, but it's not over the top at those points. So those are the points that it gets lost because the actors are doing their parts correctly. Where like I don't know the guy's name in the lead, whatever it is, he's like playing the hero. He's not hamming it up in terms of trying to play a comedian.
Wait, are you talking about Rad Shack or Johnny Rico?
Rico.
Yeah, Johnny Rico.
So Rico's like hot shot, fucking chiseled jaw, sharp chin hero, and that's what he's playing. But the entire point is, it's clearly a misguided placement of that person's desire to give back to their government and by proxy the nation or whatever.
Well, it's how they gained citizenship. You weren't a citizen.
Yeah, and it's like with that tale, the larger exploitation that goes along with what that framework does is then lost because now you have that hero to identify with because he played the hero too well. And in terms of like,
even though he was a pawn the entire time.
right.
Yeah.
Like I almost think he should have played it dumber or something in terms of like, you shouldn't want to be him at the end of that movie. But too many people walked away and wanted to be like him because of all those things that I was saying in terms of like, he's not the source of the problem. It's like a institutional problem as to why. But him going along with it is also part of the problem. But you don't get that from the film because of how the actor is like I said, he's never portrayed to be a dumb pawn. It's like he's a pawn, but it's not a pawn because of his sheepishness, and it's not a pawn because he's refusing to fight back against the system. Exactly, he's a heroic pawn, so that's why it's okay, and why we need Starship Troopers 2 and 3, because I want to see his hero's journey, even though that wasn't actually the fucking point.
You reminded me that with the prequel trilogy of Star Wars and the whole Clone Wars things, they created this backstory where people latched onto Boba Fett even more than they had previously. It's like, so now there's this whole generation of people like, yeah, Mandalorians, and forgetting the fact that he's a clone. But I think that Disney figured out that was a big mistake, and I think that's part of the reason we have Mandalorian is because Boba Fett's a clone and a criminal, and the Mandalorian Mando is like a gunslinging hero, mercenary, anti-hero. That's better. He's an anti-hero. And so on some level the audience doesn't actually want to, they want the anti-hero. And I think that's on some level that's what the heroic pawn is. They're not even in control of their lives, and the anti-hero is like always striving to gain control and have freedom, have some autonomy. I think that's part of the reason that we end up with these terrible, I don't know, spin-offs. Everything available right now is a spin-off. Everything. It's so strange. Everything exists in some other universe. My dad and I were talking about how like Twilight Zone is this, untapped resource of stories. But then by the time we ended up finishing this conversation about how, all of these stories that are basically about people, if we just transplant the story into now, into contemporary society, and update the technology, those stories would all work. But then, of course, we realize every story that exists now takes place in the Twilight Zone.
Seen Black Mirror?
That is Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it's basically
And I think that's actually, I think that's what started the conversation was Black Mirror. Is that like
that's funny.
we're at
Yeah.
a point now where like
I had to stop watching it. It's
yeah,
just too like I think that's the problem with the Twilight Zone now in terms of like I can watch the old Twilight
that
Zone.
stuff's great.
It's great because it was trying to make the social commentary about then that people should have understood, but they were too media illiterate to get then. So they just thought it was a cool show. And it's episodes like
Well, they were
um
about people.
the monsters are due on Maple.
Yeah.
It's like that's obviously a whole lot of social commentary, but when it's lost, then it's just a cool TV show. And I think that's where like um, you know, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, um,
To
what
a
was
lesser
another
extent,
one?
X Files.
A lesser extent, only because they strayed far away from like the first season. They were basing it off of real stories, and they even had the first one where it was like trying to blend real life. So that I don't blame X Files so much because they were trying to do something
Well, they were a
that was
self-contained X Files or Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, investigatory agency,
no in
kind
terms of
of.
like they were trying to cross the fourth wall and use like real life stories as the foundation for the fictional tales that they were telling and like link them, but that got to be too much work, which is why
Yeah,
they abandoned it. So I don't blame them for that, but
it's
I think it was
ambitious.
doing it was, but they were doing something different in that the Twilight Zone vignettes are like all fictional constructions that are meant to be social uh commentary. Not, and I don't. I could be mistaken, but I don't think there's any of them that are meant to be like real life story based.
Oh no,
Um,
I've.
and that's where like
If they are, man,
X
that's
Files
some
was doing
crazy
something
shit.
slightly different in terms of how they were trying to like make commentary about um, government lies and like government hiding things in plain sight, and then in the same way that like Men in Black was also like things in plain sight might not also like might be much different than they appear to be, whereas like Twilight Zone is definitely they're making specific comments like you can't lose power and revert to your monster senses and not be that person that they're talking about. And this is like when looting happens or when blackouts happen and crime happens, that's what they're talking about in terms of like human civilization shouldn't be tied to electricity that specifically, but when the lights go out and people are like, oh shit, I think I heard something, they start to revert to these like base instincts, and that darkness breeds the unknown and the response to the unknown. And that's a very specific commentary about human nature that's like very well illuminated through that story that I don't think X Files is trying to make commentary like that. It's like X Files is trying to do this cool, oh, what if all these things that happen in real life seem like they were supernatural, and then there's this government agency that covers them all up, Men in Black style, and we'll relate that to the people's concept of what the Men in Black like. This is what the Men in Black actually are, um instead of doing a TV show about the Men in Black the way the movie did it. Let's do it in a grounded way. If there was a Men in Black agency that went around and investigated these things, this is what it would really look like. And then they mocked that to the point where Jesse Ventura and Alex Trebek show up as actual Men in Black in the X Files to mock that framework because they know what they're doing in terms of like if they took the X Files and made it more comedic or more like mocking in tone, that's what it would look like. And they do a few of those
Yeah,
episodes,
but
and
it's
they
like it's very
play with
very
that.
carefully delivered. They don't go out of
Oh,
their
for
way.
sure.
They don't go out of their way to be funny. They're situationally funny because of just the nature of or the context of the episodes.
Well, I mean, those episodes they are going out of their way to be funny, and those specific episodes where they're illuminating the Men in Black trope in a way that allows Mulder and Scully to make fun of it and pulls it away from the X Files characters that we know in a serious tone. That's why there's only a few of those episodes, but that's why they can do that. And like the episode where they do the crossover with Cops,
Oh
where
yeah,
it's like that shit is fucking that's so fourth wall crossing, but also fictional in a way that only a few other things were able to pull off, like Reno 911. And what's hilarious is a few of the people on that X Files Cops episode show up in Reno 911 as background actors, or not background, but they're also like um not the main Reno cast, but they're doing like subplot help as the uh I wonder how much of that they improved, but I think that
man,
there's
Reno
like a
911 definitely takes place in the Twilight Zone.
of course, and that's what I mean, like that episode of
you know,
X
you
Files
reminded me
where
because of like your about with the first season of X Files. It reminds me that like it 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 doesn't quite achieve the same level of realism that we perceive from like Law and Order. But even Law and Order, I mean, how many spin-offs of Law and Order are there?
yeah, I don't know, that's one of the
Special
like
Victims Unit, Organized
yeah
Crime, Criminal Intent, True
biggest
Crime,
franchises at
L.A.,
this point.
Trial by Trial, like seven. There are seven. Holy crap! There are 1,316 episodes across 62 seasons of television. Okay, that's its own story universe. That's definitely not Twilight Zone. That's like Crime World, where the only thing that happens is crime.
That's also the universe where the guy who made Cop Killer is a cop, right?
Of course,
I mean,
that
that
only
shit
makes
is.
sense. Yeah, only in the crime universe would the author of Cop Killer be a detective on the Special Victims Unit. That's the only place that makes sense now. Everything else can just go home.
Well, it's the wildest shit, man. I remember when that song came out, and it caused so much stir And then I remember listening to it for the first time and being like, this shit is fucking whack. Who's like, nobody's actually listening to this fucking song. And it's kind of the same shit as the Chinese AI influencers and like, when nobody in the hood bumping no fucking cop killer. That shit was so whack.
Yeah, I
That
got my
track
black
is one
shirt
of the
on. I got my black gloves on.
oh,
I
it's
got
one of
my
the
ski
wackest
mask
tracks of
on.
all time. And
This
it
shit's
was
been
like,
too long. Got my 12
oh
gauge
my
sawed off.
God.
Got my headlights turned off. About to bust some shots off. Okay.
I promise nobody was bumping that shit. You can't bump it. It wasn't even a track you can bump because it's not, it don't slap like that, first off. It's just whack production. The beats whack. The fucking rhyming is whack. And like the whole outrage was people responding to the title in a way, obviously, it's meant to cause outrage, but they were literally acting like people were driving around listening to that song and pulling over and like attacking cops and shit. That's what they were trying to make it seem like was happening. But I can guarantee you, even if somebody committed a crime against the cop, they definitely weren't listening to that song, that fucking whack ass song. I guarantee it
Oh
because the
man.
song is unbearable. It's like painful to listen to. And then they did like a punk rock or rock and roll version of it that was even worse. And white kids wasn't listening to that either, and they was trying to make it seem like, oh, now Ice T's going after the white children, and hip hop is infiltrating our white youth, and it's funny to see the disconnect between what media will say is happening versus what's actually happening. Do you remember when they were trying to say kids were smoking bed bugs and it was just dabs? I mean, not just dabs, but
Oh god.
I don't know
Bed
what
bugs.
fucking kid got the lie in the media's fucking periphery, and then they ran with it. But some kid, some genius out there probably lied to somebody's parent and was like, oh yeah, kids are smoking bed bugs. And instead of them following up on actual dabs, they did a whole couple of months run where they were trying to stop kids from smoking bed bugs.
First off, do these people realize how difficult it is to actually capture a bed bug?
Oh my God.
Like, I mean, it's really difficult. Really, really. Even if you're in, like, let's say you find a couch on someone's front porch in a district full of college students, because that's where some bed bugs are. Good luck catching them and putting them in a container for any amount of time. And then when you try to get them out, they're gonna get out because they're crazy fast. I, that just sounds like the kind of thing that nobody actually thought about. They just got scared of. How the hell are they making oil out of an insect? God, idiots. Oh, here it is on Snopes. School kids
Yeah,
are
I was on
smoking and
Snopes
injecting
too.
crushed bed bugs to get high from a hallucinogenic substance they contain. Oh man, man, this is just one of those reminders that there are fucking morons out there who figured out how to use a keyboard and access the internet. Okay, now that that moment of silence is over, um, oh man, I don't. I thought that like in health class or at least in high school or maybe in a college course, people would have taken the time to become somewhat informed about like psychoactive substances. Everyone goes to college. You think I would assume that everyone at least has one opportunity to be exposed to even just weed. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are people out there who are truly bubbled and have no exposure to this whatsoever, and so they're just they'll believe anything. Also, I feel really bad for people that live in a in a community where the weed is so terrible that they just don't even go looking for it because man,
Well, I think you might be overestimating people's exposure to things in terms of like, people will still they'll live in states where it's legal and not engage with it, and their perceptions are never changed.
yeah.
And it's like, not to say that everybody has preconceived notions, but I think if your preconceived notions are a certain way, then you're not gonna try to like break them, and
Yeah.
nothing anybody does can come and break those notions. Which is like, what it is what
No,
it
it,
is,
it
but I think
it's
that's part of why it
no,
stayed illegal for so
you're
long in the
right.
first place.
You're right. There are a bunch of kids out there who were pretending to put Tide Pods in their mouths, and then some other kids who were even dumber actually put Tide Pods in their mouths, and that became a challenge that people, for whatever reason, pretended to do on the internet just to freak out their parents. And then a few people actually got sick from it. I think because they were fucking morons. That's like Darwin's laws, right? Survival of the fittest or something. I think you're right. There needs to be like actual media education, media consumption education curriculum, and that needs to begin at an earlier age than when people just decide they want to use the internet. There's no curation of anything. It seems it's just let's do a search for let's do a search for Twilight Zone again.
Or I mean, okay, let's look at this from a different angle.
Google's not
If
even telling me
people
how many hits that it returns.
like, I think it would be obviously people wouldn't be that inclined to do that with regular media, but what about pornography? And it's like, not to say that we should do this for pornography, but I think it's easier to highlight the disconnect with reality that can happen in terms of like, if you've never been with a person and whatever your preference is, getting into pornography before being with the person can cause all kinds of problems and disconnects with expectations of reality, especially like you get into hardcore stuff before you get into actual physical intimate like relations. And it's like, I see, it's funny in terms of like the youth get made as if they're hypersexual, and then if they're not sexual enough, and there's this element of them having to grow up with the internet as a window into sexuality, but also having that window into sexuality available basically the entire time they're, sentient. Is like, I can only imagine how that affects people's understanding of sex. Because I remember in terms of when we were kids, it would be
You had to go out of your way to find porn. You did.
okay. Let me put that into context. You might find a porno magazine in the woods randomly. If you're out in the woods one day, you might find something like that. You might find a porno tape randomly in the woods, but you couldn't just go find it um like at the drop of a dime if you were a kid looking for pornography. Like, that just wasn't possible for kids in the United States until the internet, basically. And even when the internet first hit, it wasn't that easily accessible. And there was actually a lot of walls that a regular kid would have to go through to be able to find hardcore pornography. Gradually, with Google, that became less and less. And it's not just Google. Um, there's a lot of things that made that less and less difficult for kids to run into. And I think that's where, maybe 97, 98, somebody born after that point probably has an entirely different understanding of how to approach sex than somebody who's born even just like 3 or 4 years before them. And I think it's hard for somebody who was born before that, I think it's hard to grasp how different it's probably going to be for somebody who's born after that. Because, like I said, our access to pornography was just so limited compared to like the kids after 97.
So 4 years ago, Pornhub was hosting 11 petabytes of data, which is roughly 7,000 years of continuous viewing. 4 years ago.
So we don't need any more pornography.
No.
Like, no more pornography just needs to be made.
They don't need to make
Like,
any more. There's 7,000 years of continuous porn. There's totally enough porn. uh.
Well, and that makes me wonder if
Porn totally takes place in the Twilight Zone.
There might be more porn than all other movie types.
Oh man,
you know what I mean?
That's crazy. How many hours of movies? Okay, Google AI, tell me.
Roughly 143. So, yeah. Okay.
13,000 porno movies are released every year.
Jesus Christ.
Well, if...
So, in the United States, roughly 600 to 800 films are produced each year.
Okay, so yeah, there's way more porn than there are actual legitimate films. Oh, man. That's, like, prolific as fuck.
Yeah, there's probably... And that's just professional, because I don't think that counts amateur, right? I mean, that the Pornhub hosting...
No, that's like...
We're talking about Pornhub, like... If there's 13,000 porn films made every year,
films, not like
that's films, not content.
Yeah, that's not just like, uploads from someone's OnlyFans. These are actual productions by porno movie production companies that are producing 13,000 porno films, like 40 plus minutes, 40 minutes to 2 hours long. Who has time to do what the? Okay, I guess that's 40 minutes to 2 hours is is what makes it porno, not just an upload. It's all porn.
But again, that's where like
45 minutes to 2 hours. That's like the most athletic shit I can think of.
Like if people had to take a test, I mean, they kind of do already still in terms of every time you look at porn, it's like, are you 20? Are you of legal age? That's still a minor test.
Yeah.
But there's not even that when you're consuming other media. Like, at least ask if the fucking person's 18 or over when I click on Generation V. Like, they don't even do that shit anymore. Oh, I guess it says 18 plus on the description, but it didn't prompt me when I started watching it, like, is everyone watching this over 18? Because like, I don't, you never know with people in terms of like, it's not even necessarily them being stupid so much as not thinking. Like, not thinking about something isn't the same as being stupid. Because it's like, if I'm a parent and my kid's like, I want to watch this superhero TV show, you're like, okay, cool. Is it Generation V? Oh shit, that's a huge difference than fucking damn near any other superhero show. And that's where, like, if a parent is doing something when that kid asks them that question and they don't get to ask the follow up, what's the superhero show? Well, suddenly that kid's watching Generation V because the parent was like doing paying their online bills or something when the kid happened to ask him a vague question that wasn't specific. And I think that's where I can't blame every parent whose kid ends up watching this shit for not being able to monitor their kid every fucking second of the day, because shit like that happens where it may just even be a miscommunication and your kid ends up watching this thing and now suddenly there's a giant fucking dick on the screen because a kid watched Gen V through Prime Video. And that's where I'm like, as somebody who doesn't have kids, I think that shit's fucked up how easy it is for a kid to end up on some shit like this. Where as an adult, I don't even want to fucking see half the shit in the show in terms of like, I didn't watch Gen V for the sex scenes. I knew there was going to be sex scenes in it because that's what they do to shock people. But I'm an adult. I can skip it. It's not going to like fuck with me. If a kid saw that shit, it's going to be way different. And it's too easy for a kid to end up there. And I think, and then not even like a kid so much as like somebody who's not mentally capable of discerning that the thing that they just saw is gross. Even though it's meant to be shocking, the people who made it know it's shocking because it's gross. So they know what they're doing isn't meant to be something to be romanticized necessarily. They're trying to make you laugh or cringed out or whatever, knowing that what they're doing is gross. There's no uh,
It sucks because I
illusion.
see that stuff and I think, oh, this is some lazy writing.
It is. It's totally lazy writing. Um, but somebody who doesn't have as much experience with media isn't going to get that. And
Yeah.
I think there's different levels, but they could come away with the completely wrong message from that. In terms of sometimes media doesn't have a message and you have to be able to discern if it's like, oh, this is doing this for the sake of that thing and this is not actually meant to try to teach you anything. Like, well, that's also something that takes a higher level of understanding to be able to say, oh, this there is no commentary. And that's fine for media to not make any commentary. But again, when it gets to people who don't have enough understanding of that thing, it can become dangerous in a way where, I wouldn't have thought I it's not the media that's the danger, it's the access to the thing that can cause a misunderstanding that's the danger. And I think that's where I'm
I think
like,
that's
I'm
how
not
we end up
saying,
with like conspiracy theories. People run with an
oh, for
idea
sure. Oh,
that
yeah.
that's
Sure.
inspired by who knows what, and then we end up with I don't even know what the latest conspiracy is, but I'm
I
sure
want to
it's
say, sorry, I was going to say, I want to say half the conspiracies that we grew up with go back to a piece of media that was misinterpreted or like misremembered as something that they thought happened in real life, but was actually in a film. Like a significant portion of them. Um, have you seen Capricorn 1?
Don't know. Don't think so.
So I think personally, I think a bunch of people probably saw Capricorn One on like some TV broadcast when they were a kid, and then got it in their head. The Capricorn One was the events of what happened in Capricorn One were like a real conspiracy, and then you get the like moon fakers
Oh, it's a
because that
faked Mars landing story. Okay.
yeah. So that film, if you watch it now, you could take that film and a conspiracy theorist will say, "Oh, this is exactly how they did it. They're just trying to show you how they could do it, and this is the proof that they did it." Whereas when it came out, obviously, it's the story isn't trying to imply NASA's faking it. It's trying to play off of this element of like these events could lead to this thing occurring in this hypothetical scenario. And this is why, as a piece of media, it only works if you suspend disbelief on these certain things. Um, like the only way Capricorn One works is if you think the government is good enough to pull off the conspiracy, but not pull off the flight. That's incompatible. But it's only incompatible if somebody carries it out enough to the point where you're like, oh, they they couldn't pull off the flight, so how could they pull off the conspiracy? That either they could do one or both or neither. And I think that's where ultimately, if they could pull off the flight, they wouldn't need to do the conspiracy. Whereas the conspiracy is dependent upon them not being able to do this thing that they claim to be able to do. So there's all these things about conspiracy stories that come from a basis of needing to suspend disbelief about the government and their capacity in the first place. But that's why the like Jason Bourne or like the I don't know if you've seen Utopia, but there's stories where the government does so much and then they fail after that, where it's like if they were going to fail at all, they're not going to be able to do these other things. And I think that's where it's like, oh, you're telling me they can like wash Jason Bourne's memory and he's going to retain all of his skills, but they can't cover it up because he's just that good. They trained this one guy just that good, and they were never able to redo that again, which is why they can't cover up him. So it's it's like if you think too long about these things, they just don't make sense as to why a lot of these conspiracies are just conspiratorial nonsense. But that's also like it's hard to get to that point and then acknowledge like, yeah, shit happens. There are actual conspiracies that have happened and existed, but they're far less complex than the stuff of fiction. And a lot of times they get caught because they're not good at doing these things. Like it's really hard to do a conspiracy and not have somebody fucking lie or expose it in terms of the Watergate conspiracy. Well, that shit got caught fairly quickly. That was an actual conspiracy to try to cover something up. So we know about it because they couldn't fucking do it that well.
It
So
seems that all of the current conspiracy theories are centered around AI. Oh, here's a QAnon. 9/11 popped up again in 2023 in July.
I don't know if it was me, but it seemed like nobody actually cared about 9/11 this year. It was wild. It like came and went.
I wait. What day was 9/11?
I
September
don't know.
11 was a Monday. Of course, nobody cared. It was a Monday. You gotta have that happen on like a Thursday or a Friday for people to mobilize and do something.
Oh yeah, I guess if they didn't get days off.
Yeah, nobody's gonna memorialize something if they're at work. Too busy working. And if it's not like a an actual get off work kind of holiday, then it better be on a Friday or a Saturday. Can't have that stuff on a Sunday. Got to go to church. Got to get ready for Monday on Sunday. Yeah, all the QAnon stuff is actually in 2022, and it looks like all the stuff from 2023 is pretty much AI related.
Yeah, it seems like people overestimating the capacity of AI's reach is where all the conspiracies are at now. Like AI is doing this, AI is doing everything.
Yeah, AI is the reason that there is a QAnon conspiracy.
Right.
Once they realize that they've been duped by AI, they're gonna get extra shit. Who knows what they'll do? Dark economics. AI doppelgangers. Yeah, man, this is just more support for media literacy training.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like the same way where you're like, oh, you have to prove you're 17 or up if the movie theater cards people. It's like just prove you took that because I feel like some kids would pass it earlier. So that's where it's not even about restricting on age so much as capacity to understand things because some 14-year-old kid would pass a media literacy test before some a lot of 18-year-old kids or dudes or whatever. So that's where I'm not it's not about like an arbitrary age or anything like that. Specifically about the capacity to understand the thing that's being consumed because that's where again with the porno example it's like if somebody has never been with another person, not to say that they should be restricted from all porn, but there's stuff that they just shouldn't even get access to before they touch another person intimately. And in terms of it's just gonna fuck up their brain chemistry and fuck up their expectations in a way that is like it could be easily avoided by just not showing them that thing or not giving them access to that thing. There seems to be this unfettered access as a right where I'm especially somebody who's been trained in media literacy, I'm not sure that's beneficial to society. I don't, especially when the outcome is a false perception of knowledge. In example, when people have access to Google, they think they can just Google anything, and that gives them this false sense of understanding
I
that
think
anything that can be accessed on Google that they understand it, when that just is not the case.
I think if one is interested in training in like intimate gymnastics and intimate contortionism and intimate aerobics, then yeah, then they might actually want to see some of the variations of pornography that exist. But I think that it's, I don't know. To me, it's very clearly like a novelty form of entertainment, and I'm sure that there are some like therapeutic applications of viewing pornography, but that stuff has to be like supervised by a healthcare professional if that's what it's being used for. Otherwise, it's just self-medication by unqualified practitioners, probably. But if it's just novelty and entertainment, then that's what it is. But I agree. I think that it's dangerous. Do we really? Do we really need a bunch of teenagers learning like how to do things by watching adult athletes, performers, like people who are like in absolute like prime physical condition to do these things, that have somehow like intuited the I guess how to gyrate and then how to put themselves in these positions that allow them to do these things. Like a lot of that stuff is pretty athletic, actually, like really athletic.
Well, but even then, a lot of this stuff is like
Also, not
um
practical.
seasonal. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like they'll do one thing one year, and then the next thing that thing is out, and that's you go into that year. That's the first year you're learning things, and your rest of your life is like, oh, I need to do that thing, even though it was all a product of the industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like you know, I don't know if that type of industry wide uh like influence, it's not their job to monitor it and how it's influencing people, but that's also why I think it's even more in terms of some sort of like agency or something again where not to say that people should get licensed to view porn specifically, but there is something to, if they're gonna rate stuff, age is clearly not a good enough litmus to be able to access those rating scales, because then there's going to be people who are over 18 who aren't going to be able to pass that test. And I don't think it's just about that magic number of 18 or 21 or whichever one they want to say is adult. But a lot of dudes wouldn't ever pass that test. So that's where I think if somebody couldn't, whatever was the agreed upon test, if they weren't able to pass that test, then like, yeah, you shouldn't give that person porn, or no, you shouldn't give that person a film that's violent with lots of gun violence and lots of people dying on screen, because that person has not demonstrated that they're capable of consuming that material and rationally digesting it. And the whole, oh, okay.
And I bet there are a lot of adults who aren't ready to rationally digest pornography.
So the funny thing that got me down this rabbit hole in this line of thought, I don't know if you've seen that video. There's a video of someone pretending to fight an AI powered robot in mixed martial arts. And it's like the lighting's terrible, the shadows are terrible. It's obviously fake to a discerning eye. And I was making fun of this video on Twitter, but there was like people on commenting on it like, "Oh, this is scary what AI can do." And I'm like, "Oh fuck. Oh fuck. You guys don't realize that this isn't real. Like
What
there
is
needs
it?
to
A
be
robot power slap?
no, it's like in a cage, it looks like a dude's practicing against a robot in like a one-on-one just MMA sparring match.
Okay, I think I found it.
But it's like again, obviously fake. But when I was seeing people comment on it like hey guys, you guys can't be this stupid, right? I mean, I'm not being this aggressive on the post. I'm like you can't possibly believe this is real, right? And what I realized is like some of the people who were commenting are like 15-year-old boys. So I'm like, okay, I don't blame a 15-year-old kid for looking at that and not necessarily being able to tell the difference between a fake video and something that's real. So I'm like, I'm gonna give these guys a pass because they're kids. But then somebody came and responded and was like, well, some of us 15-year-old kids are looking at this thinking about like what's possible and what we're gonna do in the future, and proceeds to list movies that were either satiric in nature or took place in the past altogether. So that's where I'm like, okay, you don't understand these things you're consuming, young man. If you watch Back to the Future, you watch Star Wars, you watch Starship Troopers, and your response to these things is, oh, these things could be cool in the future. This kid should not be consuming those things. So that was originally what got me down thinking down that road in terms of some of these kids are,
Why would a robot study Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
wouldn't have to study. It would just have to be programmed if it was capable of hitting those positions.
Yeah, but why would it even do that? Why wouldn't they just make it fight like a machine? Chainsaws don't have to learn how to punch.
Why would they build it in the form of a man in
Well,
the first place?
that's like the real
You know,
question.
that's always why it's usually bad science fiction at the root of these problems or at the root of these things. In terms of like, if you're gonna build a robot, there's no reason to stick to human biological conventions. And at that, if it's especially meant to be a robot of war, the human body has too many vulnerabilities. So using that model, it's clearly just bad bro projection.
What was the name of
And
Adam? Blendo! Adam Savage's Blendo. It was like a robot blade that spun around and just destroyed everything. It was like, it was so badass, it just kicked the crap out of everything. Like, that's a fighting robot. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just found that thing.
well, I
And you
mean,
were excited.
I don't know if you ever watched BattleBots, but they never built anything that looked like a human on there.
No, they Blendo is a dish. It's like an upside down dish with a lawnmower inside of it that spins around a bladed lip. It's more like a helmet. It's just a helmet that rides the ground. And that thing was like the baddest battle bot.
Well, and I think this gets to the when we're looking at some of these science fiction projections, we're at the limit of some of these people's imaginations.
Yeah.
So, what is it like, Real Steel or something with Hugh
Oh
Jackman,
yeah, yeah.
where
The
he's wearing a robot suit, or he wears
it's the suit's
radio
mimicking him or something,
controlled.
right? Right?
Yeah, so it's basically Rock'em Sock'em Robots, but with radio control for the boxers, so it mimics. So there's
Yeah, so he just sits there and spars. He shadow boxes, and the robot does all the juice.
this conceptually is just so fucking stupid that it's like I don't even know where to begin to deconstruct why it's dumb. But at some point, somebody was probably like, I don't care if it's dumb. This is just cool. This is the one thing I wanted to see when I was a kid, and it was cool. And then there's gonna be enough of those fucking idiots to go see the movie and be like, yeah, I know it's dumb, but it's cool.
Man,
And they'll defend it to the death and just won't acknowledge that it's a stupid premise. It's a stupid, I never saw it, but it's definitely a stupid movie. And the idea of somebody wearing a remote uh, controller to pilot a battle suit that's also not very good.
man,
It
robot.
feels like
What is it? Uh, Real Steel is like the low rent version of Pacific Rim in the sense that it only needs one pilot. It's not even that big. It's just really tough. It doesn't have any real special powers, but it's still better than. Do you remember that terrible movie Robot Jocks?
no.
Oh man, it's like the worst. I mean, it's not the worst. It was 1989. The country settled disputes with two giant machines that duke it out on some big old field, and the robots are like. This is like the worst Western adaptation of mecha anime. It's not even. It's real. It's live action, but these robots barely move around. They're like top heavy. You see it, you think these things could never stand upright for very long. And but without robot jocks, some kid wouldn't have seen that movie, and then they wouldn't have grown up to create Pacific Rim, which is, I mean, it's a stupid story, but it's beautiful. Like it's just glorious to see these giant machines, or the visualization of these giant machines moving the way they do. I love it. I think it's awesome. But I also liked a lot of those anime from my childhood where it was a giant robot. Even if it was a crudely drawn, mostly cylindrical giant robot, I still thought that stuff was awesome. And so I can appreciate Robot Jocks. It's trash. It's so terrible. I mean, it's like sad actually. Those robots wouldn't stand a chance against modern giant robots. They would just get ripped to pieces. Their pilots are practically exposed. Like I actually recommend you find it and scan through it. You'll see what I mean. But that stuff's still important, I think. We can kind of trace the evolution of that kind of story. But even then, those are impractical robots. They're not like like Mech Warrior is way closer to what I think a battle robot would actually be like, or even actually the crab tanks from Ghost in the Shell. Those make the most sense to me because they're like all terrain, can go over anything, go over things that treads can't go over. That makes sense. But Ghost in the Shell's a little it's its own beast. I think actually Gundam would be the best way to do it because that's an entire story universe that's built off of like dueling giant robots.
Yeah, supposedly there's a live action in the works, but we'll see.
Oh man, that's gonna be really ambitious. That has to be ambitious as fuck. Otherwise, it's. I really hope that it doesn't get Ghost in the Shell treatment. I'll be so mad if that happens. I don't even watch Gundam anymore, but I would just be really disappointed if they just picked some like early story arc and just mangled it so they could put the wrong person in the pilot suit. How many Gundam?
There's a lot of Gundam stuff.
Okay, let's see. There are 50 TV series, films, and OVAs. 51
There's a
Gundam
lot of
series,
Gundam stuff.
51
Jesus.
series, and 14 movies. Manga, novel, video game, plastic model kits.
Well, and it's wild. Like, as somebody who got into the model kits, there's this whole segment of people who collected the model kits and didn't put them together, and they're just holding on to the boxes. Where I'm like,
Wait, like unopened models?
yeah, which is not, you know, it's not a big deal because the older models aren't quality's not as good as the newer stuff, but it's even, you know, it's just crazy in terms of I think in my youth, I would see those model kits at uh cons and like there's no there's no real context because I think it wasn't until high school maybe I saw Gundams. Um I might even been college with Adult Swim, but I didn't
500 hours of Gundam right now. No, as of 2016, so there's like even more than 500 hours of Gundam.
oh yeah, there's gotta be, yeah, with all the TV shows and shit.
That was
Um
7 years ago. 7 years, they can definitely come up with a few more than.
well because those TV shows were made when they would do 50 episode seasons
Yeah.
and shit like that. So I, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a shitload of unwatchable material, and you know, it's there, but it's probably not going to be entertaining. But yeah, people would have those kits, and I didn't really get any context for them. And then once I realized how many people would have them and never build them, it was like there. I think the model kit, the Gundam specifically, because it was, you know, something that moved, was sort of intimidating for people because a lot of people bought them and never built them. Um, but that was definitely if somebody had those kits when we were young, they were the uber nerd. They were like the
Yeah.
nerd of nerds, which is where, you know,
I
again,
remember seeing like um, metal model kits, metal robot kits in like Chinatown when I was a kid. That stuff, and they weren't huge, and I think they were. I don't think they were even that complicated. But I just remember seeing stuff like that and thinking like that's really cool stuff. Like seeing Veritech fighters in robot form, but they're made out of metal. That stuff was really neat. I guess they weren't small actually. They weren't giant, but they weren't really toys. Well, you've got a Gundam, and that thing's actually really complicated.
yeah, it's the different grade, um, the perfect grade are like the best you can buy as like a collector and put together, but the metal grade is like the top tier that they
Yeah,
make, which is like, you know, they're heavy and they have substance to her, and it's like the all the intricacies in the joints and, you know, seeing what goes into the actual individual models is also illuminating in terms of, oh yeah, this is clearly an exploration of the abstract, and it's fucking absurd design. Like, there's no reason that this thing would ever exist in this form except for the sake of aesthetics and um that's effectively the story behind the Gundam designer in terms of like the guy wanting to make like what's the biggest gun thing I could make. So it's like it's not really anything complex behind the visual design, but also when it gets turned into over 500 hours worth of media behind it, I think somebody coming into it at the end is definitely they need to not be like again not be tested on whether they know that these Gundams are fake or not, but it's like, okay, why are you getting into this? You don't want these things to actually exist and humanity to be like subject to these things, right? Right? And it's like the same shit with cyberpunk where a lot of the people who consume cyberpunk make me question if they get the point of it. It's like you don't want a cyberpunk future, right? You understand that these things are supposed to be like the worst elements of some of the things we're headed towards, but we're not supposed to
I
want this
think I
future. You
think
know that,
that's I
right?
think that might actually be like uh, central to the issue is that the vast majority of science fiction, almost all science fiction, is cautionary tale. That's like the foundation of it. It's almost always a cautionary tale. Very rarely is it like some high fantasy where, oh, we built a spaceship, we're going to go to a distant galaxy and find a new home for humanity and be really successful at it. No one's going to get hurt. Because that's not fucking interesting. There's no story there. Oh, and we were on the seed ship for 400 years. We had to go through different stages of cryo sleep. But no one died. No one cares about that story. No one. Who cares if there's a version of humanity that has like the most advanced technology that allows us to transit between galaxies? I mean, that's cool, but if no one dies or there's no conflict, there's no human story involved, like there's no tension, then there isn't really a story.
Yeah, I was struggling to come up with the concept of a story that doesn't have any real conflict that was also interesting, and it's damn near impossible.
There aren't any.
Right?
I think that's why almost
And
all narrative takes place in the Twilight Zone at this point. It's because it's a natural environment for tension. It's a natural environment for some kind of conflict. There's got to be some kind of tension. There's one there Pornography does is unique in that it's sexual tension, but it's not like aggravated. Well, I guess there is some weird novelty porn out there where people like to be violent, but I'm not into that kind of shit, so I don't even really pay attention. But that's an environment where everyone gets what they want, feasible, more or less, and no one gets hurt, and everyone is satisfied at the end. But I'm not sure that's like broadly interesting. That's like super niche versus the vast majority of fiction, which is all fantasy. It's all about conflict. It's all about struggle. Or it's all about some kind of oppression or liberation or any of the principal stories that keep being retold. And all of the most interesting stuff is all conflict. It's all either internal or external. There's always a conflict and a cautionary message, whether it's received or not.
well, and I think that's ultimately it's like the way humans tell stories inevitably seems to be based around the notion of conflict, which is why it feels like we can't have stories without conflict. And I think that's where it's almost like the story itself is about something being overcome, Otherwise, there's no story. And I
Yeah.
think that's why there is this element of like feeling trapped to not be able to tell stories without conflict. But ultimately, it seems like, yeah, if you're trying to tell a story, then you're actually really specifically going to try to tell something about a conflict, whether you like it or not, because that's what stories ultimately do in human
Yeah.
civilization.
You
And I
have
think
to.
it's hard to reconcile.
Yeah. I mean, how does the hero's journey take place if there's no adversary to overcome? Then is it an internal struggle? Is it like all about some internal conflict? Well, that doesn't inform us about any external story. If the external story is lukewarm and it's all in the character's head, is that even a hero's journey? I don't know.
Well, and then I was looking, is there a de facto villain's journey? And I couldn't really find one that was agreed upon in the same way that the hero's journey has been articulated. And the reason I was looking for the villain's journey is because I'm trying to philosophically decipher if it's possible to have a story without conflict, and ultimately, it doesn't really seem so. And that's where it's like a journey is almost in this context dependent upon some sort of obstacle arising.
I know why
Otherwise,
you
it's
can't
not a
have a
real
villain's
journey.
journey. Villains aren't conflicted. They know exactly what they're doing. They don't have any qualms about what they're doing. A really good villain like the Emperor from
I
Star
mean,
Wars, he
not
doesn't care.
necessarily, not
He,
necessarily.
eh,
I
the
mean, I think
Joker's
that's
not
also why
conflicted. I'm just I don't know.
Joker's very conflicted at the beginning. I think that's why there could be an articulated villain's journey, but all villains aren't the same, which I think it's why it's more difficult to come to a
Yeah.
conclusive villain's journey in terms of some are anarchic and some do have intention, but those are all still villains regardless of whether they have intention or not. And I think that's, there's a difference between a villain and an anti-hero.
Oh wait, what's the name of the glass? That's a villain's journey.
Oh yeah, I mean,
There we go. So there's a villain. That's not, but it's not. It's there's no. You're right. There's no archetype for it.
but it's also couched within the hero's journey. So it's also that it's not its own journey. It's just the inverse of the hero's journey in that case, which is why I don't think the actual villain's journey would simply be the inverse of the hero's journey, but there could be a villain's journey that's going to look like the hero's journey inverted in one of the iterations, just because losing something and then trying to uh course correct to gain it back
So
is
Chris
that
Volger of he's a Hollywood development expert and screenwriter wrote that villains are the heroes of their own journey.
that's a cop out.
Yeah.
That's a cop out, and I think that's there's this notion of a lot of people who do bad things think that they are doing good. That's not an actual villain that we're talking about. That's a deluded person who happens to do villainous things. Like um Joker does not think he's a good guy.
No, no, he has no illusions about that.
None. And so I think that Joker and Homelander are not the same.
No, 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 definitely
Homelander
not.
Homelander thinks he's doing right by humans by being an iron-fisted uh authoritarian. He thinks he's doing right. Joker does not. And I don't think those are the same. That's why
Yeah.
it's going to be hard to articulate a single villain's journey in the same way.
Well, it's like the many faces of evil. They're not they're not a homogenous thing. It's easy to rally against evil, but it's not. They're like splintered.
But this is also why the villains are always more interesting because all the good guys look the same. Their motivations all look the same.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.